Okay, let's unpack this. For this deep dive, we are getting into strategy. Specifically, the universal rules of, well, selection and influence. We've got this fantastic source stack for you, and it spans everything from, the deep history of why we choose who we choose.
Right, from evolutionary psychology.
All the way to the most modern, almost cynical tactics you find in marketing, in retail, and even psychological illusion, what they call mentalism.
Essentially, yeah. We're looking at the invisible psychological architecture that governs choice. How do we select partners, or products, or even just ideas?
And the really critical part.
And critically, how do external forces try to guide, or pressure, or even secretly force that selection, all while making you feel like it was your free choice?
That's the mission. We're going to start at the absolute engine of choice, mating. Because if you look at the sheer weight of evolutionary history, any individual who failed to reproduce, well, they failed to become an ancestor. It's that simple. So every strategy that led to success, the good, the bad, all of it has been passed down.
We've inherited a winner's playbook, basically. And the research really distills this down to 5 core strategic approaches we're going to explore. You have the highly invested, long-term committed strategy.
Right.
Then the lower investment, short-term strategy. You've got extra pair, mating infidelity, mate poaching, which is, luring someone else's partner.
And then defending against that.
And finally, mate guarding, the essential retention tactics. These 5 forms, they're really the foundation of human relational strategy.
So let's dive into the foundational principle that drives all of those, which is this concept of differential parental investment. It sounds a bit technical, but it's absolutely critical to understanding why choice looks so different across the sexes.
It really is. This principle, which Robert Travis articulated back in 1972, it posits that the sex that makes the smaller biological investment in offspring.
Which is historically men.
Historically men, yes. That sex should be less discriminating and generally more eager to mate. The cost of a bad choice is just lower.
And on the flip side, the cost of a bad selection is, well, it's astronomical for the sex that invests more. Historically, women, carrying the huge burden of pregnancy, childbirth, early care. Given that massive asymmetry in cost, the female selection strategy has to be overwhelmingly choosy.
And you see this play out so clearly in the short-term strategy. The data consistently shows men express a much greater desire for sexual variety. And they're far more willing to relax their standards, their preferences, when they're pursuing short-term encounters. Quantity kind of takes precedence over strict quality control.
That might sound like a simple textbook generalization, but the finding that is just arresting is how universal this is.
It's incredible.
The sources cite this massive cross-cultural study. I think it was 48 nations.
48 nations, yeah. Every major region on Earth.
And it found that sex differences in what they call sociosexuality, so the willingness to have uncommitted sex, were statistically significant across all 48 cultures.
Every single one. That near-perfect universality is just compelling evidence that this isn't just cultural conditioning. It's a deep-seated, evolved feature of our psychology.
Rooted in that differential.
Rooted directly in that investment culture. Now, it's vital to clarify that women aren't passive here. They absolutely have a short-term strategy. It's just, its focus is entirely different.
Right. It's not about volume. It's highly, highly selective. It's focused on very specific things. Status, dominance, superior genetic quality. So if the risk is worth taking, what are the specific rewards women are actually seeking?
The trade-offs are specific and they're immediate. A short-term encounter can be a way to quickly get benefits, like resources or protection, that might be missing from a long-term partner. And crucially, it can provide access to high-quality genes from a lover. Maybe that offsets poor genetic quality from a stable mate, or it could even secure a child if the long-term mate is infertile.
So it's like an ancient risk management strategy.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
A quality control and risk management strategy.
The game is not over. For many, that's when the conflict really intensifies.
Right.
And this brings us from selection to conflict. The battle for the mate. Mate poaching and mate guarding.
And the data on mate poaching is, it's truly striking when you think about it. The research shows that 93% of men
93.
and 82% of women who are in committed relationships reported receiving a long-term poaching attempt. The world is just full of competitors.
And the success rate for the poacher is alarming. 67% of men and 41% of women said they've been successfully lured into a long-term relationship by the poacher.
Yeah.
Now, if the female strategy evolved to be so selective, so focused on stable investment, how does the theory account for a 41% success rate? Does selection just break down?
I think that high success rate just shows the persistent reality of competition. I mean, desirable people rarely stay single for long, which forces competitors to look at those who are taken. And poaching tactics, they often rely on chipping away at the existing bond. It's not always some grand gesture.
It's a long game.
It's the subtle long game, like befriending the couple, waiting for a moment of vulnerability, and then trying to drive a wedge. It's an infiltration of the relationship's psychological defenses.
And that constant threat of infiltration is exactly what the evolved mechanism of sexual jealousy is designed to fight. It's a defense system, but the triggers are really sex-specific.
They are. For men, jealousy is fundamentally about preventing paternal uncertainty, that core, ancient fear of investing your resources in another man's child.
So the trigger is sexual.
The primary trigger is sexual infidelity. And a man is also triggered by rivals who display what women want. Signals of better financial prospects, better resources.
And for women, the key threat isn't just sex, it's the diversion of commitment.
Exactly. The resources, the protection, away from her and her children. Therefore, female jealousy is most activated by emotional infidelity, which signals that long-term, permanent loss of investment.
And they're also more jealous of rivals who are more attractive.
Yes, women show greater jealousy toward rivals who exceed them in facial and bodily attractiveness. It suggests a focus on perceived genetic quality, which could tempt a partner away.
So if your partner is constantly being poached, retention requires not just vigilance, but constant signaling of your own value. This brings us to the core of influence. How to advertise yourself or your product as the prize.
This is sometimes called costly signaling theory. The idea is, if the signal is expensive to produce and it's hard to fake, it reliably indicates quality, so selection favors it.
And you see these extreme examples in the animal kingdom.
Absolutely.
Like the satin bowerbird. The male doesn't just build a nest, he builds this elaborate structure, bower, and decorates it only with blue objects.
Blue bottle caps, glass, plastic.
The sources mention one male who made 3,000 trips just to collect 1,500 galvanized roosters.
3,000 trips. That level of dedication. That is the signal. It's an extreme example of focus and effort. The female chooses based on the bower's quality, which guarantees she's getting a high-status man.
Or the peacock. When he shakes his tail feathers, the iridescent eye spots, they stay almost completely still.
Right, it's this visual trick. It's believed to captivate the female by drawing attention to the stability inside this big, dynamic, high-energy display.
And in humans, this translates to signaling through resources and status, so we call conspicuous consumption.
Yeah, buying luxurious items that have little functional utility over cheaper versions, purely to signal socioeconomic status.
It's proof you have resources to burn.
The sources have this powerful historical example from 18th century France. During actual food shortages, the aristocracy would hoard flour.
Not for food.
Not for food, but for cosmetics, to powder their wigs. The non-functional waste of a necessity was the ultimate status signal.
So what about physical signals? The research suggests body shape can be a cue for resources. Wait, so does that mean a perfectly sculpted six-pack might actually hurt a man's signaling if he's aiming for a long-term resource-focused mate?
It potentially could, yeah. It really depends on the context and what the woman is selecting for.
Yeah.
Some research does suggest that a little extra abdominal fat on a man can cue his reliable ability to access and hold resources.
Meaning he's not doing hard manual labor all day.
Exactly. He's not engaged in constant arduous labor, and he can afford a high-energy intake. It's an honest signal of wealth in an ancestral sense.
And bringing this to today's dating world, you see men on dating profiles who are clearly adopting a long-term strategy, actively deploying dependents, kids, dogs, other pets. It's a silent, non-verbal way of signaling high paternal investment potential. I can commit, I can care, I have resources to protect.
And this whole discussion of selection and value, it brings us perfectly to the architecture of influence. Because once you understand what someone values, you can structure a scenario to guide or even force their choice.
All while maintaining that powerful illusion of freedom.
Exactly. Think about those classic psychological forcing techniques that mentalists use. If I ask you to quickly name a color and a tool, red hammer. Red hammer. Most people say red hammer. It feels like a free, spontaneous choice, but it's a statistically statistically predictable outcome.
It's the archetype.
It's the statistical archetype, the most common generic representation that the brain just defaults to under pressure. And mentalists are masters of creating controlled environments where every apparent choice leads to their predetermined outcome.
Let's get into a couple of techniques. First, there's equivoke. This is where a spectator eliminates items, say 3 coins. The performer uses really ambiguous language,
Beautiful language.
so that no matter which coin the spectator points to, the language makes them keep or eliminate exactly what the performer wants until only the force item is left.
And then there's the walk anywhere force, which is fascinating. A participant walks through a room and stops when it feels right. They believe they chose the spot freely.
But they didn't.
Not at all. The performer has used subtle markings or spatial cues, maybe told a story that climaxes at a certain point, to create an invisible geofence. They guarantee the person stops exactly where they plan.
That idea of a detour is the perfect bridge to modern marketing, which uses technology to physically detour choices.
Oh, absolutely.
Burger King's Whopper detour campaign is the classic example. It's all about rivalry and geofencing.
Right. They put a geofence around all their rival McDonald's locations. If a customer drove within, I think it's 600 feet of a McDonald's,
The Burger King app would trigger.
the app would trigger a promotion for a 1-cent Whopper. You had to drive to a Burger King to get it.
They took their competitor's selection point at McDonald's and turned it into an involuntary trigger for their product. They literally engineered a detour that led to a purchase.
And they wrapped it all up in this idea of underdog credibility. They positioned themselves against the giant, like Avis's famous slogan, "We try harder."
Consumer roots for the rival.
Exactly.
And you see this in mate selection too. Strategic social media ambiguity, posting photos with attractive people where you can't tell their relationship status.
Right, it manufactures rivalry.
It creates instant competition anxiety in anyone watching, which increases the perceived value of the person because, hey, other people seem interested.
And going back to mentalism for a second, the performer might intentionally fail a small trick early on. Or they'll frame a big prediction by saying, "I'm probably wrong, this is a very difficult trick."
They're presenting as the underdog.
They present as the underdog, lowering expectations and building massive credibility. So when the trick finally works, the success is far more impressive because the underdog succeeded against the odds.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, whether you're choosing a partner or a burger? It means your internal architecture is ancient and the external world is engineered to exploit it.
And that's the whole concept of evolutionary mismatch. Our selection mechanisms, they evolved to manage choices within these small ancestral bands of maybe 150 people.
Right.
Now, thanks to social media dating apps, we're exposed to thousands of options in minutes. That intense novel input puts immense strain on our ancient mind.
Which amplifies the success of these influence tactics that exploit the pressure of choice.
It does.
So the core lesson here is that understanding this architecture of selection, of signaling, of strategic forcing, it lets you see the strings being pulled, whether those forces are ancient evolutionary demands or modern geofencing.
And so here's a final provocative thought for you, drawn directly from this architecture of influence. One really powerful technique used to increase compliance in any context is the disqualification game.
Okay.
The influencer will say something like, "This job or this relationship might not work with you. You might be too analytical, or you might not be outgoing enough for this team."
The question we want you to mull over is, what deep-seated human need does this tactic rely on, and how does triggering a defensive need to disprove that disqualification make you significantly more compliant in mate selection or in any other context?
Why does being told you can't do something make you desperately want to do it more?
Keep observing the choices you make and how often those choices might have been predetermined by forces you didn't even see. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.